They didn't even have the decency to call him into an office. The email landed in Marcus Reed's inbox like a digital bullet. Effective immediately, your employment with Harrington and Company is terminated. No meeting. No explanation. No thank you for 5 years of tireless work that had saved the company's largest account from collapse. Just a cold, impersonal message signed by Human Resources Department, though Marcus knew exactly whose fingerprints were all over it. The smell of fresh brewed coffee drifted from the break room, as if mocking him. Around him, colleagues glanced up from their desks, eyes flicking away quickly like they were afraid guilt could be contagious. The air was heavy with something unspoken, something Marcus had been feeling for months. This wasn't about performance. This was about him. Harrington and Company had always been polished on the outside. Glossy brochures with smiling, diverse stock photo employees, annual charity galas for social causes. But Marcus had seen behind the curtain. He'd noticed how promotions always seemed to skip over certain names. How the executive floor marble tiles, crystal water dispensers, silent corridors was a parade of identical faces. White, male, smiling like they'd already won the game before Marcus even knew the rules. And at the top of it all sat Richard Harrington, CEO, fourth-generation heir, a man whose handshake felt like he was measuring your worth in dollars or, in Marcus's case, in stereotypes. Marcus had heard the whispers from day one. Harrington had never hired a black executive in the company's 78-year history. He didn't have to say anything openly. His decision spoke for him. But this firing Marcus without warning, right after Marcus had secured a $3.2 million contract for their biggest client, it wasn't just insulting. It was personal. He stood slowly, the termination email still open on his laptop. So that's it. His voice was calm, but it cut through the hushed office like glass under a boot. A few heads turned, eyes widening at the fact that he was speaking outright here, in the open-plan floor where whispers were currency. Richard Harrington's glass-walled office loomed at the far end, doors shut, blinds half-drawn like always. Marcus could see his silhouette leaning back in the leather chair, a phone to his ear, laughing at something that probably wasn't funny. Marcus wasn't stupid. If he left quietly, they'd replace him with someone more aligned with the culture, a euphemism he'd heard one too many times. But if he made noise? No, he wouldn't just make noise. He'd make history. He closed his laptop, slipped it into his bag, and started walking not toward the elevator, but toward the CEO's office. Each step felt heavier, charged with something he'd been holding back for years. The memory of his grandmother's voice, "Don't let them write your story for you, Marcus," rose in his mind like armor. He pushed open the door without knocking. Harrington looked up, eyebrows arching in surprise. "Marcus, you didn't even have the guts to tell me yourself," Marcus said, placing the printed termination email on the CEO's desk like evidence in a trial. 5 years. My accounts brought in more revenue than half your executive team combined, and you fire me over an email? Harrington leaned back, forcing a smirk. "Marcus, these are business decisions. Sometimes it's not personal." Marcus laughed sharp, humorless. "When you look at me, Richard, you don't see Vice President of Client Strategy. You see a black man in a suit. And that's the real business decision, isn't it?" The smirk faltered. A faint muscle in Harrington's jaw twitched. "I won't dignify that with a response." "You already did," Marcus said. "The moment you sent that email." Harrington straightened in his chair, trying to reclaim control. "Marcus, this is over. Security will escort you out." Marcus didn't move. Instead, he reached into his bag not for a weapon, but for a slim black folder. He placed it next to the termination letter, flipping it open to reveal printed documents, financial charts, and a series of emails. "I was going to save this for the board meeting next month," Marcus said, his tone deceptively calm. "But since my calendar just opened up, let's have that conversation now." Harrington's eyes flicked to the papers, then back to Marcus, suddenly wary. "What is this?" "Proof," Marcus said. "Proof that your business decisions are more than personal theory illegal." The office seemed to shrink around them, the hum of the city beyond the glass suddenly distant. "You think I haven't noticed the patterns?" Marcus continued, voice low but lethal. "Every layoff in the last 2 years, every one of them disproportionately targeting employees of color. Promotions that vanish when a black candidate is the frontrunner. And this," he tapped the top document, This is a record of contracts you steered away from minority-owned businesses without even giving them a chance to bid. Harrington's composure cracked for the first time, a flash of fear in his eyes. Marcus leaned in, his voice a whisper now. You fired the wrong black man, Richard. And by the time I'm done, you're going to wish you'd sent that email to yourself. Harrington's office was quiet enough to hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Outside, curious faces gathered discreetly near the frosted glass, trying to read the room through shadows and muffled voices. You think you can just, Harrington started, his voice tight. I know I can, Marcus interrupted, his gaze steady. And the board will have to hear it. The media too. This, he tapped the folder again, isn't just about me. It's about every person you've pushed out because they didn't fit into your perfect little corporate image. Harrington tried to lean back, to reclaim that air of detached superiority. But Marcus saw the flicker in his eyes, the one that betrayed calculation. Harrington wasn't used to being confronted. He was used to controlling the narrative. What do you want, Marcus? The words came out slow, as if he was tasting them for weakness. Marcus didn't answer right away. He let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. I want you to understand something, he said finally. This isn't a negotiation. This is a countdown. He stood, gathering the folder. By Friday, either I walk back into this office with my job and a public apology from you, or I walk into the press room at the Herald with everything in this file. Harrington's nostrils flared. You're bluffing. Marcus smiled faintly. Try me. He turned and walked out, past the half-dozen employees pretending not to have been eavesdropping. Their eyes followed him not just with curiosity, but with something else. Something like hope. By the time Marcus stepped out into the cool evening air, his pulse was finally slowing. The city was awash in the glow of street lamps and the restless shuffle of rush hour. He took a deep breath, inhaling the faint scent of rain on asphalt. His phone buzzed. A text from Eli. Heard what happened. Where you at? Eli Johnson had been Marcus's best friend since freshman year of college and had also been one of Harrington's casualties 2 years ago. Brilliant project manager. Fired under the pretense of budget cuts that mysteriously didn't affect his white counterpart in the same role. Marcus typed back. Outside the office. Need a drink. They met at a quiet bar tucked between a laundromat and an old bookstore, one of those places where the bartender knows your name but never asks too many questions. Eli was already at the counter, nursing a whiskey. He looked up as Marcus slid into the seat beside him. So, Eli said, you finally went nuclear. Marcus smirked without humor. He gave me no choice. Details. Marcus opened the folder on the bar top, spreading the documents just far enough for Eli to see. His friend's eyes widened as he skimmed the pages. Damn, you weren't kidding. I've been keeping track for 2 years, Marcus said. Patterns, emails, performance reviews, everything that shows how they've been targeting people of color. I even have notes from clients who noticed. Eli whistled low. You realize if you go public, you're going to set the place on fire. That's the idea. Eli leaned back, studying him. But you also realize Harrington plays dirty. You think he's just going to sit there while you dismantle him? He'll dig into your life, your history, hell. He'll probably try to smear you before you even get to the press. Marcus took a slow sip of his drink. Then I make sure I move faster. Eli chuckled, shaking his head. Man, I wish I could be there when it happens. You will be, Marcus said. Because I'm not doing this alone. You still have your old contacts at the Herald? Eli's smile turned sharp. Yeah, and I know exactly who'll take this story. The next morning, Marcus woke to the sound of rain tapping against his apartment window. He brewed coffee, set his laptop on the kitchen counter, and began drafting 2 things at once. A press statement and a legal complaint. He didn't trust Harrington to cave easily. The man had inherited his power, and people like that didn't surrender, they dug in. But Marcus knew something Harrington didn't. This wasn't going to be a private battle. By mid-afternoon, he had an email from the Herald's investigative reporter, Lila Torres. She wanted to meet. They chose a small cafe 2 blocks from the newspaper's downtown office. Lila was in her late 20s, sharp-eyed, with a notebook always in hand. She listened as Marcus laid everything out: dates, incidents, emails, financial charts. When he finished, she closed the notebook slowly. You realize this is huge, right? If this checks out, Harrington's not just looking at public embarrassment. This could lead to a federal investigation. Marcus nodded. That's the goal. She glanced up. And you're not worried about retaliation? Marcus hesitated. I'm more worried about what happens if I stay silent. Something softened in her expression. All right, but we'll need corroboration, other employees, ex-employees, maybe even clients willing to go on record. I've got names, Marcus said, and they've got stories. Over the next 2 days, Marcus became a shadow in his own life. He wasn't going to the office anymore, but his phone was never silent. Calls with Lila, texts with Eli, encrypted messages from people he'd worked with who had their own accounts of discrimination. Some of the stories made his stomach twist. Promotions promised and then revoked when a black employee was in line for them. A Latina marketing coordinator who was told to tone down her accent. A Muslim sales rep who was excluded from client dinners because the vibe wouldn't fit. By Thursday evening, Marcus had over a dozen sworn statements. Lila was cross-referencing them with company records, and Harrington hadn't said a word. That worried Marcus. Silence from a man like that wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Friday morning, Marcus dressed in his best navy suit, not because he planned to go back to work, but because he wanted to look Harrington in the eye when the hammer dropped. At 9:15, his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Marcus Reed. Mr. Reed, this is James Porter. I'm with the law firm Harrington and Company has retained. My client would like to discuss a settlement privately. Marcus smiled to himself. Tell your client the time for private is over. He's got until noon to make that apology. After that, I'm with the press. Mr. Reed, I must advise. Noon, Marcus said, and hung up. By 11:50, the conference room at the Herald was set. Lila sat at the head of the table, recorder ready. Eli leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching the door. Marcus checked his phone. Nothing from Harrington, not even a token threat. At exactly noon, he placed the folder on the table. All right, he said. Let's make history. Outside, rain lashed against the city streets. Inside, Marcus began telling his story from the beginning, not as a victim, but as a witness. Each fact was a stone, and he was building something Harrington couldn't knock down. The truth. When he finished, Lila leaned forward. Marcus, once we publish this, there's no taking it back. Are you ready for that? He met her gaze. I've been ready for 2 years. The first article hit the paper the next morning. By noon, it was trending nationwide. Headlines screamed about corporate racism, unethical hiring practices, and a CEO under fire. The company's PR department issued a vague statement about reviewing the claims, but the board had already called an emergency meeting. And for the first time in his career, Richard Harrington wasn't the one controlling the story. By Monday morning, Harrington's smile was gone. On the top floor of Harrington and Company, the blinds in the CEO's office were drawn shut, the usually bustling executive suite reduced to a tense hush. In the corner conference room, the board members were gathered not for a quarterly update, but for damage control. Richard Harrington stood at the head of the table, his tie slightly loosened, hands gripping the back of a leather chair. We're not going to let one disgruntled employee dictate this company's future, he said, his voice sharp, almost brittle. One of the board members, a silver-haired woman named Diane Carter, leaned forward. Richard, this isn't just one employee. The Herald's article cites multiple accounts, multiple former staff. This is systemic. It's fiction, Harrington snapped. Unverified claims from people with an axe to grind. We'll discredit him, hell. We'll discredit all of them. Another board member, Samuel Ng, frowned. And how exactly do you propose to do that without looking like you're retaliating? Because from where I'm sitting, Marcus Reed has documentation, and the press is already sympathetic to him. Harrington's jaw tightened. I've already hired a private investigations firm. We'll dig into his background, college records, financial history, whatever we can find. Everyone has skeletons. We'll make him radioactive before the next article hits. Richard, Diane said slowly, if you go down that road, and it blows back on us, which it will, you won't just lose your job. You'll take the company with you. Meanwhile, Marcus was in a small office downtown, one the Herald had offered him as a temporary safe space to work while the story developed. His phone vibrated with constant up-to-tease mails from Lila, messages from people he'd never met who wanted to share their own stories, both inside and outside Harrington and Company. Some messages were supportive, others weren't. You're a liar. You're trying to ruin a good man's name. Watch your back. Marcus read them all without flinching. Fear was a luxury he couldn't afford now. Eli burst into the office, grinning. You see the numbers? Over 2 million views on the article in less than 48 hours. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Yeah, but it's not enough. Harrington's going to hit back. I can feel it. He already has, Eli said, tossing a printed sheet onto the desk. Press release from this morning. Calls you a disgruntled employee with a history of insubordination. Says you were fired for cause. Marcus skimmed it, then laughed quiet, almost amused. Insubordination. That's corporate speak for didn't stay in his place. Yeah, well, it's out there now, Eli said. And people are going to believe what they want to believe. We need to stay ahead of him. The next move came fast. Tuesday afternoon, Lila called Marcus into the newsroom. She looked grim. They're leaking stuff to a friendly blog, she said. Claims you falsified a client report 3 years ago. Says they have emails to prove it. Marcus's stomach tightened. That's a lie. I know, Lila said. But perception is powerful. We need to get your side out before this narrative takes root. Marcus rubbed his temples. All right, let's fight it head on. I'll go on record again. We put out the truth before he can plant enough doubt. By Wednesday, the media war was in full swing. Morning shows were booking legal analysts to debate whether Marcus had a case. Social media was a battlefield, hashtags flying on both sides. Stand with Marcus trended alongside Defend Harrington. Everywhere Marcus went, he felt eyes on him at the coffee shop, on the subway, even walking down his own block. Supporters came up to shake his hand. Others muttered under their breath. That night, Eli showed up at Marcus's apartment with takeout and a bottle of bourbon. Man, you're in the center of a hurricane, he said. How you holding up? Marcus poured himself a drink. I'm fine. Just tired. Harrington's playing the long game. He's betting I'll burn out before he does. Eli leaned forward. So don't give him the satisfaction. We've got more people coming forward. And you still haven't dropped the biggest thing in that file. Marcus's eyes narrowed. The board meeting notes. Exactly, Eli said. If the public sees that the board knew about discriminatory practices and did nothing, Harrington's finished. And maybe some of them go down with him. Marcus took a slow sip. Then we time it right. One wrong move, and it looks like a vendetta instead of the truth. Thursday morning, Marcus got an unexpected call from Diane Carter. Mr. Reed. Her voice was crisp but not unfriendly. We need to meet. Privately. Marcus hesitated. Why? Because you're right, she said. And if Harrington takes the company down, a lot of good people will lose their jobs. I have no interest in protecting him, but I need to know exactly what you have. They met that evening in a quiet corner of a hotel lobby. Diane looked tired, as if the past week had aged her. Harrington's lost the confidence of half the board, she said. But he's got loyalist people who owe him favors, people who think they'll sink if he does. If we're going to remove him, we need airtight cause. That's where you come in. Marcus slid a USB drive across the table. Everything's on here. Emails, memos, patterns of discrimination. Enough to end his career. Diane took it, tucking it into her bag. If we move quickly, the vote could happen next week. Just remember, Marcus said, this isn't about saving the company's image. It's about making sure no one else goes through what I did. Diane nodded once. Understood. Friday dawned gray and cold. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, sipping coffee, scrolling through the latest headlines. Harrington was still trying to spin, still trying to paint Marcus as a bitter ex-employee. But there was something in the tone of the coverage now less certainty, more doubt. At 9 a.m., his phone buzzed. A text from Lila. Heard from a source board meeting Monday. Could be the endgame. Marcus smiled faintly. Let's make sure it is, he murmured. Monday came like the slow tightening of a noose. Marcus woke before dawn, the city still wrapped in darkness, and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. He thought of his grandmother's voice again. Don't let them write your story for you, Marcus. By 8:30, the Harrington and Company headquarters was a pressure cooker. Security was posted in the lobby. Reporters hovered on the sidewalk, cameras ready. Upstairs, in the largest conference room, the board of directors gathered for what they were calling a special session. Marcus wasn't invited, but Diane Carter had made sure he wouldn't need to be. Inside the boardroom, Richard Harrington took his seat at the head of the table like a man expecting to win by default. He was freshly shaven, wearing a charcoal suit that practically shouted money. Let's get one thing straight before we start, he said, scanning the room. These accusations are baseless. Marcus Reed is a disgruntled employee trying to shake us down. If we cave to him, We set a precedent that any underperformer can cry racism to get a payout. Diane's voice cut through the air, calm but edged. Richard, I think you'll find we're not here to discuss payouts. A murmur rippled around the table. She placed a folder in front of her. We're here because several members of this board believe your leadership has put this company at legal and financial risk. And we have the documentation to prove it. Harrington's smile froze. What documentation? Diane flipped the folder open. Emails, hiring records, performance evaluations, all showing a consistent pattern of racial bias in your decision-making. Many of these decisions were made unilaterally, without board approval. That's absurd, Harrington started. Samuel Ng slid a printout across the table. It's not absurd when the paper trail is this clear. You steered high-value contracts away from minority-owned businesses without reason. You blocked promotions for qualified candidates based solely on let's just say your emails speak for themselves. Harrington's face was turning the color of raw meat. This is a witch hunt. No, Diane said. It's a vote. Down the street, Marcus sat in a cafe with Lila and Eli, a small earpiece in his ear. Diane had insisted he hear the proceedings in real time. He stirred his coffee slowly as voices crackled in his ear. Harrington's bluster, Diane's precision, the low rumble of board members debating their own survival. You nervous? Eli asked. Marcus smiled faintly. Not really. Whatever happens, Harrington's already lost control of the story. Back in the boardroom, the vote was called. 11 members. 6 needed for removal. One by one, hands went up. Diane. Samuel. Then 3 others. Each moving with the reluctant certainty of people who had finally decided to jump off a sinking ship. It came down to the last vote, an older man named Bennett, one of Harrington's longest allies. All eyes turned to him. He hesitated, then raised his hand. Harrington stared at him, betrayal etched deep. You too. Bennett's voice was quiet. You fired the wrong man, Richard. And now we all pay for it. 7 votes. Enough. Diane's voice was steady. Richard Harrington, by majority decision, you are removed as Chief Executive Officer of Harrington and Company, effective immediately. Marcus heard the words in his earpiece and let out a slow breath. Eli grinned like he'd just watched a game-winning touchdown. But Marcus wasn't smiling. Not yet. It's not over, he said. The company still has to face what it's done. That afternoon, the news broke like a thunderclap. Harrington ousted amid racism scandal. Whistleblowers evidence forces CEO's removal. Marcus's name was in every headline, every TV cheering. Interviews requests poured in. Strangers stopped him on the street to thank him, to tell him their own stories of workplaces that had quietly broken them down. He accepted some interviews, turned down others. He wasn't interested in fame. He wanted accountability. 2 weeks later, Diane called him back to the office not as an employee, but as a consultant to help overhaul the company's diversity and hiring policies. I know you may not want to set foot in here again, she said. But if you do, you'll have the authority to make real changes. Marcus looked around the gleaming lobby he'd once walked through every day, feeling the eyes of the receptionist, a young black woman who smiled at him like she understood exactly what this moment meant. He turned back to Diane. I'll do it. But not for Harrington and Company. For the people who never got the chance I did. The final twist came in a phone call from Lila. I don't know if you know this, she said, but when you were hired 5 years ago, Harrington tried to block it. HR pushed back, said you were the most qualified candidate. He let it through only because he thought you wouldn't last 6 months. Marcus laughed softly, the sound warm and sharp at the same time. Guess I lasted long enough. Months later, the company had new leadership, new policies, and for the first time in decades, executives who didn't all look like carbon copies of each other. Marcus never went back to his old office. But every so often, he'd get an email from someone at Harrington and Company, saying thank you for the fight, for the risk, for not walking away. And every time, he thought of the day they fired him, of Harrington's smug certainty that it was just another decision in a long career. It was. He just didn't know it would be his last. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.